Do you know your voice? Most men live these lives of quiet desperation. Interesting word in that quote by Thoreau is that word quiet. You see, for many, the reason why they're living lives of quiet desperation is because they've never learned how to communicate. And so they survive in silence. If you're going to connect with other people, you've got to be able to share. If you're going to lead, you must be able to communicate. And so I want to ask you this question. Do you know your voice? There's this scene in the movie The King's Speech. If you've never seen it before, it's a great movie. I've watched it multiple times. King George VI has a role that requires communication, and he struggles to communicate. It's not a natural thing for him at all. But he has to learn. And there's a point in the speech where the nation's at war. He's got to give an important wartime speech. And he steps forward, and the music swells, and there's intensity, and he stammers at first, but then he delivers a slow and deliberate piece of communication where he finds his voice. I want to ask you today, do you know your voice? Men, we've been doing these videos talking about men who thrive, that we don't want to be guys that just live in quiet desperation, that we don't want to just resign and to this idea that this life is some passivity and that everything, we've been so tamed, and that we're supposed to thrive as men. And we've been talking about the 5 C's of manhood. The C that we're talking about today is communication. We've talked about curiosity, we've talked about your courageous call, we've talked about being able to connect with other men. Well, you can't connect if you can't communicate. It's very hard to express your curiosity without the ability to communicate. You cannot lead, and you're called to lead as a man if you can't communicate. And so, men, we want to talk today not just about talking, but how to communicate with clarity and purpose and power. Let's check it out. Hey, thanks for joining us on the channel. We've been doing this series on manhood, expanding on the quote by Thoreau that most men live lives of quiet desperation, and men have really taken a hold of this. And we've been walking through these 5 C's, and I'll tell you why I want this. I want this for you as a man, because I don't want you to just be existing. I don't want you to just be surviving. I certainly don't want you making decisions out of desperation. And I don't want you in your car driving around angry, wondering why you're so frustrated and why life isn't going the way that you want, even when you received everything you've ever wanted. And because I've experienced a transformation in my life, and that's why we started this channel, so that other people can experience that kind of transformation. And so I'm going to give you some information in this video, but the hope of the information is that the information is changed into transformation as you go to apply it. And today we're talking about communication, one of the C's we've been talking about in these 5 C's. Communication is a huge part of all of our lives, whether it's written communication in your email, whether it's a text message that you're sending to your wife about what time you're going to be home, whether it's a note that you got to write for your kid to the school and about why they shouldn't have detention or why it is you're going to be late one day, or it's just talking in a business meeting, closing a sale, applying for a job, interviewing other people. Communication is essential. And I'm going to give you, I know that you're not all communicators by career, but I'm going to give you 3 principles that can elevate your communication. But more than that, it's not just because I want you to have this skill. I want your life to be changed in such a way that you love life. So I don't want us living these lives of quiet desperation. So I'm going to talk to you today about communication. I'm just going to give you 3 principles, these 3 principles and a little bit of application. And if we'll apply this, we can begin to see significant transformation in our own lives. So the first principle I want to give you is simply this, that words create worlds. We serve a God who created us in his image, and he's the God of the Word. God spoke, and everything came into existence. Let there be light, let there be, and he spoke out of nothing, ex nihilo, things into existence. We come to the New Testament, John chapter 1. Jesus says, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. He's talking about himself, and he talks about himself as the one who reveals the Creator. No one's ever seen God. If you want to know what God's like, look at Jesus. And so most men do live these lives of quiet desperation. Quiet is an interesting word that Thoreau chose when he gave that quote. And you think about, just in life, that we serve a God that's a God of the Word, and how often we have to use words. I know things use streaming TV and our phones and all that stuff, but even through our phones, we communicate with words. I mentioned that movie, The King's Speech. If you haven't seen it, here's a verse I'd give you to think about as you watch the movie. It's Proverbs 18:21. It says, the tongue has the power of life and death. Let me take you into the moment of history when that movie took place. there's a king who never thought he'd be king. In fact, his older brother was supposed to be king. King George VI is the one who stepped in because of his older brother rejecting his responsibilities to be king, which many men do. They just run, and they seek pleasure, and they seek what they think is going to satisfy them. But Proverbs talks about that too, right? There's a way that seems right to man, but in the end it leads to death. Well, there's this man, he ends up being King George VI, who he's born into royalty, but he's paralyzed. But not paralyzed that he can't walk, he's paralyzed in the tongue. He's got a debilitating stammer. He can't speak, but this role of leadership requires that he speaks. And war loomed over Europe in this time, and the people needed strength, and they needed clarity, and they needed vision. And so what happens is he tries all kinds of things, marbles in his mouth and medications, all kinds of seeing different doctors, but every time he steps to the microphone, he's gripped by fear. But the powerful part is he didn't give up. Even before he meets this unique speech therapist, Lionel Lug, he fought every word, trying to make it sound polished, and it wouldn't. But he needed to be able to communicate to lead with power. But when the moment came that he had to step in and lead with power, he was able to speak clearly. Here's what I want you to realize. He didn't find his voice in the midst of comfort. He found it in the crucible of his calling. We've already talked about our courageous calling and being willing to step in to that calling. Many of you will not grow as communicators and learn how your words create worlds until you step into that courageous calling. And why is it that our words have so much power? Because they carry weight. Your voice is different than other people's voices in other people's, whether it's your kids, whether it's your brothers and sisters, your siblings, whether it's the people you work with. And your speech has the power to stir their souls. I mean, just think about it. The world doesn't need us to be louder, which is sometimes what's happening, like in the political arena or in sports. The world doesn't need louder men. It needs clearer kings. The world doesn't need louder men. It needs clearer kings, and your words have power. James chapter 3 says the tongue has the power of life and death, or a small spark, set on fire, an entire forest. It's no one can tame the tongue. It's this untamable thing that's in your mouth, but you're meant to use it to glorify, magnify, and point to the God who spoke everything into existence, Jesus, who calls himself the Word, through the way that you speak. With clarity, to stir souls, to cast vision, to shape worlds truthfully, wisely, with discernment, and to give direction. Your words matter. So here's what I want you to think. Are you using your words to build or break? If your world is chaotic right now, I want you to check your words. They might be the very thing that's creating your storm. Think about that. You might be you're yelling, you're upset, you're frustrated, you're living these lives of quiet desperation, but then the way that you're spewing your words out, not maybe truthfully, not maybe wise, not maybe setting the right direction, instead of causing disaster, you might be the one creating the storm in your life. Is it true? They see our words create worlds. Our second principle I want to grasp today is that communication is more than just our talking, our speaking. In fact, listening is a form of leadership. James tells us in James chapter 1, verse 19, be quick to listen, slow to speak, quick to listen. All heard the joke before. You got 2 ears, 1 mouth for a reason, all that. But the reality is, it's more than just listening. You do have to listen. And I don't mean listening so that somebody's mouth stops so you can start talking. I mean actually hearing what somebody else is saying. Communication is also body language. I'm leaning on this desk here. We're having a casual conversation. If I was giving you a wartime speech, I would be stand up, shoulders back, slow, deliberate talking. In fact, your body language communicates whether someone should listen to you. You don't hear a lot of public speakers come in that are all squirrely and they're not sure where they're supposed to be, and you don't want to listen to somebody that's like that. They're not even sure about what they're saying. In fact, I heard a study recently where there was a group of criminals, various different types of criminals. They were all shown the same video of people walking down the street. I think it was in New York. And they were asked, who would you rob? Who would you pick up? Who are you going to kidnap? If you're going to commit a crime, who's it against? They all picked the same people. And it was people who didn't occupy their space with their body. They didn't communicate that they had confidence. They knew where they were going. They knew where they were. They knew who they were. And so when you're communicating, your body language matters. What type of communication do you want to have? How important is it what you're talking about? What are you doing with your hands? Are they up like this, authoritatively? Are they submissive? Are they conversational? Do you use gestures? What is your presence like? Your silence, pauses. See, communication is also emotional intelligence. What are you feeling in the moments when you're communicating, or just in life? I know for myself, I happen to be a professional communicator. I communicate on a regular basis, and I was leading our church a couple of years ago. We were heading into a vision time. We were going to communicate a vision for the next 10 years of our church, what we wanted to see happen, what it was going to take. And I was struggling with health. I had some internal issues. I won't get into all that right now, but I was getting worn out really fast. And I had some things, significant. I ended up having to have surgery. But on vision night, I got an eye infection. I had some other physical problems. Internally, I was struggling, and I lost my voice preaching the 2 services to our church. We got a church of about 1,000 people preaching the church that morning. I could barely talk. I could barely see. And it was vision night. And I felt like God had a sense of humor. And afterwards, I had just preached several weeks in a row. One of our elders, is the chairman at the time. His name is Jock Murray. He's also a communicator, teaches sales training. He said, do you think you should take next week off from preaching? And I said, yeah. And he said, do you think you should take 2 weeks off? I lacked emotional intelligence so much, I didn't even know how to answer that simple question. I said, let me talk to my wife. You know what my wife said? She goes, yes, you should take 2 weeks off. Try and recover some. I ended up having to step out of that whole series, get surgery. There was a point where my doctor called me and said, you must go to the emergency room. There was poison in my body from things that were happening. Again, not to get too dramatic in that, but I didn't even know what to say. I remembered when we had a men's speaker one time at our church years before, and he got up and he started talking about how he didn't know how to communicate his feelings. And so his counselor gave him a chart, and it had a happy face at the top and a sad face at the bottom and a range of emotions in between. And when his wife would ask him how he's feeling, he would point to something on the sign, and I thought he was pathetic, like self-righteously inside. I thought that was so sad. But when I was pressed into the moment, I don't know how to ask for help. I didn't know what to do. I don't know how to step back and be able to even acknowledge that things were wrong. I lacked the emotional awareness. So I'm getting paid as a communicator, a public communicator, but I lack emotional intelligence. Oh man, I was weak in ways I didn't even know. How are you going to be empathetic and know how other people feel if you can't even express your own feelings? And I mean beyond just happy, sad, fine. Don't ever say fine. How are you doing? Fine. What does that even mean? And so I want to challenge you. Communication is more than talk. It's listening. It's body language. It's emotional intelligence. And so men, thriving men, don't stuff their emotions. And many men who do that, they stuff them until eventually, like a volcano, they explode. Thriving men don't stuff their emotions. They steward their emotions. And they use their emotions, their physical and their presence, their emotional intelligence to bring words that heal themselves and others. Your words create worlds. Your communication is more than talk. And then the third principle that I want you to get today is you speak with purpose, not just volume. Louder doesn't mean clearer. Sometimes you're in a huddle and playing sports growing up or whatever. It's like, hey, I'm like getting everybody's attention. Angry doesn't equal effective. Your communication should build bridges, not walls. Think about that analogy. Your communication should build bridges, not barriers. You shouldn't be building up. No one can talk to you. No one can touch you. No one can do. And I'm talking about in your marriage, in your parenting, at work. See, clarity, it beats charisma every time. Your effectiveness coming from empathy and words that create worlds, and your emotional intelligence when you speak with purpose, not just volume. That's the kind of words that can create vision and futures that people want to step into. And so as a leader, I don't want you just to influence by getting the numbers up at your company, by increasing the dollars that come in, because your influence without rising in communication, the results, people can find results anywhere. See, thriving men, you don't just raise your voices, you raise your standards. And you do that through the words that you speak. Words create worlds. It's in the power of the tongue that there is life and death. It's our God who spoke into existence everything out of nothing using his word. It's Jesus himself who says, in the beginning was the Word. Jesus was part of creation. Let us create man in our own image, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. Yeah, he spoke it. And the Word was God. God is a communicating, a revealing God. In fact, that's what Scripture is. He's revealing himself to us through his Word. What do your words reveal about you and about the world that you're creating? Some of us, our own disasters have been created by our words. Evaluate your words. And so what do we do? What do we do to grow in this stuff? I've given you 3 principles. Your words create worlds. Communication is more than just talking, and you don't just raise your volume. You raise the purpose in what you're speaking. You raise your standards in what you're saying. So it's not just about what you say. It's also about how you're saying these things, but not angry doesn't equal effective. It's not about getting louder. It's about having greater clarity, greater purpose in your speech. And so what do we do? Here's what I'd encourage you to do. Some daily reflection on your words. You might even create, not a diary, we're men, but a journal, and ask yourself this question at the end of every day. What did I say? Did it build or did it break? To your kids, to your teammates, to your coworkers, to your boss, to those who report to you. And what do you regret that you spoke? Where did you have an opportunity to speak life and you didn't take it? This next one's going to be hard. And if you're not serious, you will not do this. And it might be the thing that stops you from ever thriving. What are your feedback loops? Why don't you ask other people, how do I come across? Some might be too scared or unable to speak on their own to be able to answer that, but some might love you enough to tell you the honest truth, even when it's not all awesome. And then what is your emotional vocabulary? I would encourage you to be able to express emotions beyond happy, sad, and fine. And so as we wrap up this communication, about communication, I want to challenge you, men. There's a lot of fear and frustration in this arena. You feel like maybe you said something and other people just don't get it. They're not doing it or whatever it is. Your emotional intelligence will help you understand what was taught to me by a friend of mine. It was a previous elder at our church, communications major, great communicator. The communication is a receiver phenomenon. What you say isn't as important as you oftentimes knowing what they heard. And so I want you to speak like the man that God designed you to be. I don't want you just to copy culture. I want you to shape culture, because your words create worlds, and thriving men speak life into dead spaces. What's dying in your world where you stayed silent? You cannot thrive until you learn to communicate. And I know you can do it. If you got any thoughts, this would be a great video to make a comment. And if you liked this and you think it'd be life-giving to someone else, maybe a man that you know that would benefit from this, why don't you share it with them? Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. If you didn't like it, go ahead and hit the dislike button. I'd love to hear about that. I'd love for us to have a godly debate about these things, even if we disagree. Thanks so much. I think we're better because we had the conversation.